All right, guys, welcome to the show. I have way too much news for you today. So, we're going to get into it in a little bit. I'll give you the real reason Don Lemon was fired. I'll give you the real reason Tucker Carlson was fired. I'll give you reactions from all across the political spectrum. And I also have for you, sad to say, one Bernard Sanders has already endorsed Joe Biden immediately after he officially launched his 2024 campaign. And that's another thing. I'm going to play Biden's launch video and react to it in real time. And civil war on the right is heating up yet again. Now we have Steven Crowder and Candace Owens revisiting their beef and their threats of lawsuits, which is fun for everybody except them, but that's okay. So we'll dive into that and much, much more. You guys know the deal. Shameless plugs real quick. Everybody click like, click subscribe. We already passed that 1 million sub mark. Now we're trying to pass that 2 million sub mark. There's plenty of people who watch the channel but don't subscribe. I don't know what you're doing with your life. Just click that subscribe button, get it over with. You know you want to. Let's get it done. And remember, you guys can always listen to the full audio podcast version of the show over on Spotify. We dump the full show there every single time that we do a show. And of course, your support on Patreon is deeply appreciated. Never talk to any advertisers. Never will. Small dollar donations. You know, that's how we fuel the show. Link in the video description box below. And support Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. And by the way, we have a phenomenal Crystal Kyle and Friends episode coming up this week. You're not going to want to miss it, so definitely subscribe. All right, now let's go ahead and dive into it. So, Joe Biden officially launched his 2024 campaign. I'm going to get to his launch video in a little bit. It's a little later on in the show, and I'm going to react to it. But before we do that, I actually want to talk about what I think is more important, which is what you see on the screen right here. Bernie Sanders endorses Biden, rules out 2024 bid of his own. Now, I'm not surprised by that latter part, ruling out the 2024 bid. He already said he's not going to run. The only time he would run is if Joe Biden didn't run. He made that pretty clear. Biden has made clear for a while that he's going to run, so we knew that Bernie wasn't going to run. Now, in terms of the endorsement, if you guys remember, it wasn't that long ago, Bernie actually had some kind words to say about Marianne Williamson when everybody else in the Democratic Party, the elites, were basically scoffing at her and swatting her aside. And on that, you know, it was sort of classic Bernie Sanders, just better than the other Democratic politicians. But now we have quite literally on day one, as Biden announces his 2024 campaign, Bernie's like, and I endorse you. And I endorse you. Okay, so here's what they say in the Associated Press. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont said Tuesday that he would forgo another presidential bid of his own and instead endorse President Joe Biden's reelection. The leading progressive, who was Biden's chief rival in the 2020 Democratic presidential primary, told the Associated Press that he would do everything I can to see the president is reelected. Quote, the last thing this country needs is a Donald Trump or some other right-wing demagogue who is going to try to undermine American democracy or take away a woman's right to choose or not address the crisis of gun violence or racism, sexism, or homophobia, Sanders said in an interview. So I'm in to do what I can to make sure that the president is reelected. Interesting choice of words, talking about undermining American democracy, when we already have a situation where Biden has two opponents and he's made pretty clear he's not going to debate them. So right now, we're not in the general election. We're in the primary process. And Joe Biden is undermining democracy in the primary process. And Bernie's commentary is, well, we got to make sure a Republican doesn't win because we don't want to undermine American democracy. How about undermining American democracy right now, where we pretend like we don't have a choice in the primary and there's a coronation for the guy who can barely complete a full sentence? Biden on Tuesday announced his decision to seek a second term, even as polls suggest that voters in both parties don't want him to run. By the way, the number is 70% don't want him to run, and only 26% want him to run. The Democratic president will face the winner of the Crowder Republican primary, which features former President Donald Trump and half a dozen lower-profile conservatives. For much of the year, Sanders had left open the possibility of running again himself. On Tuesday, he said that he would not run, and he discouraged any other high-profile progressive candidate from doing so either. His decision suggests that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party will ultimately unify behind Biden's 2024 bid, even if progressives aren't excited about him. Quote, People will do what they do, Sanders said of other potential primary challenges. I think Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee, and my job, and I think the progressive movement's job, is to make certain that he stands up and fights for the working class of this country and does not take anything for granted. Bernie, there's another option in the race. In fact, there's multiple options in the race. One of the candidates who's running is much more in alignment with what Bernie says his values are. Look, understand something, guys. I get it, right? Like, I'm not unreasonable. I understand that when you're inside the belly of the beast, the calculation is a little different. So, for example, from Bernie's perspective, he's thinking, well, if I endorse Marianne Williamson, let's say, which I wouldn't expect, but just for argument's sake, if he endorses Marianne Williamson, is Bernie defanging any and all influence he would have in a potential Biden second term? I think that's the calculation that they make, is like, look, I might agree with Marianne Williamson more, but if I go for Marianne Williamson, I'm basically cutting off my direct line to the president, and he'll be more impacted by more conservative Democrats, and they'll push him in that direction. And so I want to make sure I have an open line of communication. I want to make sure I'm a voice in that room. I want to make sure to do that so I can win on the policy priorities that I have. This is me steel manning his case as to why he feels like I should endorse it. The other thing is he probably thinks, well, he's totally inevitable, so why would I buck power if he's going to win anyway? I want to have more of a voice in the room. I want to be able to shape the agenda better. Again, this is me steel manning his case. But the fact of the matter is this. Bernie himself in 2016 and 2020 was scoffed at. The Democratic establishment and the elites, swatted him aside like he was a fly. And from their perspective, they're like, this is a joke. You're a joke. And so Bernie, being in that position, being in that hot seat, he knows what it's like to be an underdog candidate fighting in a principled way for a better Democratic Party and a country that's social democratic. He understands what that's like. So given he's been on this side of the equation, you would think perhaps it would tweak his calculation a little bit. Now, I said from the beginning, and I've been saying this from behind the scenes, I think it would show tremendous courage just to sit out of the primary and say, hey, let it play out. Whatever happens, happens, and I'll back the eventual winner. I think that would show tremendous courage because everybody knows Joe Biden is a colossal favorite because he's got the entire media on his side. He's a bigger name. He's the incumbent. He has a massive incumbent advantage as a result of that. So I think that would show tremendous courage. But he didn't even do that, right? I don't expect him to endorse Marianne, which, by the way, in a world that made sense where you weren't playing power games, ideologically you agree much more with Marianne, so you would endorse Marianne. That's the truly principled thing to do. But I would still give it, I would, tip my hat to him if he said, I'm just going to stay out, right? But he didn't do that. On day one, he bends the knee. And look, you just have to call balls and strikes here. Call it like it is. It's disappointing. Because if you look at, on paper, what Joe Biden stands for, what Marianne Williamson stands for, we know who the better candidate is. It's not even close. And this is even coming from a guy who I've told you guys, Joe Biden has governed left of where Joe Biden, the senator, was. So he's been a better president than he was a senator. He was a standard centrist, corporatist, even right-leaning senator, and his voting record was not good. He's been a better president than he was a senator. He's to the left of where he was when he was in the Senate. That's great. But as Bernie says himself all the time, can we really afford more incrementalism? And keep it real, going with somebody like Biden, you're rolling the dice with the country because he's the weaker candidate, and that emboldens the right, and that makes it more likely we'll have another Donald Trump term, or you might get DeSantis or somebody like that. So, I would argue this move from Bernie and all these Democrats who are just so-called progressive Democrats who are backing Biden, it's like, you guys are emboldening the right. You guys are playing Russian roulette here with the country. The more electable candidate, the better candidate would definitely be Marianne Williamson. I don't know if you noticed this. She can complete full sentences. She doesn't have a gaffe every other second. Her policy agenda is far more popular. She's got, colossal numbers of young people who, by the way, Joe Biden is struggling with massively right now. She's polling the best in swing states versus all the states. So it's just to see the attempt to snuff Marianne Williamson's campaign out in the crib is incredibly disheartening. Because what happens is the media and all these Democratic politicians will to fruition the fact that, well, that Biden's inevitable. It's like, well, maybe Biden wouldn't be inevitable if the media gave the other campaigns a fair shot and talked about them and covered them. Maybe they wouldn't be inevitable if your ass just sat out and didn't rush to cuck yourself to Biden on day one. Maybe it wouldn't be inevitable. So Bernie knows what it's like to be in the position that Marianne Williamson is in. He knows, and he doesn't care. Now, again, I'm not trying to discount his decades and decades and decades of being a genuine fighter for the people. Of course, I'm not trying to do that. His record stands on its own. But the reason why this is worthy of criticism is because this move doesn't measure up to that record. Even if I'm steel manning his case, which is he doesn't want to lose his voice in the room. He wants to be able to push the direction he wants for the country and have Joe Biden's ear. I understand all that. But this is what happens. Sometimes you get lost playing that Washington, D.C. swamp game. And you lose your values. And now you have what? I'll virtually guarantee you, nobody in the Progressive Caucus is going to back Marianne Williamson. Nobody. And that says a hell of a lot about the Progressive Caucus and Bernie Sanders and nothing about Marianne. In fact, if I was Marianne, I would kind of wear it as a badge of honor. Be like, yeah, I'm not getting endorsements because all these people are part of the club. I'm not. They're elites. I'm not. They're in the establishment. I'm not. I'm here to represent you. They're there to politic and play the hierarchy game and try to climb to the top and nominally get change that way. When it comes to Bernie, I do think he is actually trying to get change, but a lot of the others are just playing that careerist game where they're trying to climb the ladder. They want to have the opportunity of maybe getting a position in the Biden administration or getting his backing the next time they run for office. They think they could raise more money if they have the Democratic establishment behind them, and they think they become more inevitable. And maybe that's true, right? But it's certainly not brave. It's certainly not principled. And I have the feeling if you go back to like 1990s Bernie and you tell him, here are going to be your options for a presidential race in 2024, and you're going to pick the much more conservative Democrat, I think he would be disgusted with himself, to be honest. I do believe that. And again, this is even with me steel manning his case. I'm being as kind as humanly possible to Bernie Sanders and describing his motivations. I would give him tremendous credit if he just stayed out. Just don't try to end this thing before it even begins. Don't throw your lot in with the obviously worst candidate. But no, he decided to do this. And this is pathetic. And this is a colossal misstep from Bernie Sanders. And it shows even he's not immune to Washington brain. Even he's not immune to the power games. And I think the final point I'll make is this. I sincerely just think this way of doing politics is ineffective, right? That's the main point. Because this is what we've seen from the Democratic Party for so long. This is what we've seen from them for as long as I've been alive. It's this idea of let's play the inside game, let's accept the neoliberal framework and just try to be as progressive as possible within that framework. And it's like, no, what has that gotten us? What has that gotten us? It's gotten us Obamacare. Wow, we don't even have a public option. It's gotten us more tax cuts for the rich, or under Democratic administrations, like they increase the tax rate on the rich by a whopping like 3%. Oh, right? Like this is what it's gotten us. It's gotten us things like the IRA instead of Build Back Better. Build Back Better would have been genuinely transformational. IRA was not. It was just an incremental step in the right direction. This is what it's gotten us. So it's time for a new politics, man. And this is why I'm supporting Marianne. And I don't care if she ends up with 1% of the vote or she ends up winning. Again, it's all about the fight. It's all about being principled and trying to get the right things implemented come hell or high water, regardless of the consequences. And so the meaning and the purpose is in the fight. And I'm backing Marianne, even if Bernie Sanders doesn't, because I think he's wrong. And if I'm being honest with you, I think it's kind of embarrassing. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.